In a world scorched by collapse, survival is a battle, and love is a battlefield. After the end of civilization, a small group of wanderers crosses the wasteland in search of hope, shelter, and something worth living for. Among them, two men, one a ghost from her past, the other a flame lit by disaster, are locked in a quiet war for Elena's heart. But in a world where every choice has weight and every bond can break, their rivalry risks tearing more than just themselves apart. When the group encounters another camp of survivors, led by a man unlike any she's known, Elena is faced with a decision that could rewrite everything. This isn't just a love triangle. It's the story of what survives after the world ends. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sun had become a cruel god, bloated, bleached white, and indifferent. It hung low in the sky, casting distorted shadows over the scorched earth, where twisted metal skeletons and crumbling highways stretched endlessly. The world had gone quiet since the collapse, save for the low growl of the wind dragging grit through broken bones of cities long dead. Elena adjusted the scarf around her face, the fabric already stiff with dust. Her boots sank slightly into the loose ash that covered everything like snow. She walked at the front of the group, eyes squinting against the glare. Every step forward was an act of hope or madness. No one was sure anymore which. Behind her, Marcus trudged with a rifle slung across his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. He moved with quiet confidence, the kind of calm that came from losing everything and living to tell about it. He had always walked like that, even before the world burned. Back when Elena knew him as the boy who carved her name into a sycamore tree beside the river. Before, Jude followed a few paces behind Marcus, whistling low between his teeth. His jacket was newer than the others, patched with leather and pieces of tarp, but still not enough to protect him from the relentless wind. He adjusted his grip on the crude walking stick he used more for flair than necessity. Jude was always performing, always smiling a half smile that said he knew something you didn't. Elena could feel their eyes on her even when they weren't looking. It was in the way Marcus lingered near her when the group stopped for water, and the way Jude's stories always ended with a glance in her direction. She pretended not to notice, just like she ignored the tension that pulsed between the two men like a fault line. "Should be a town up ahead," Marcus said, breaking the silence without turning his head. "One of the old farming places. Might still be a well if it wasn't hit too hard. Or it might be full of bones," Jude added, stretching his arms overhead. "Bones and rot. But hey, a guy can dream." Elena didn't laugh. She never did. But Jude kept trying, throwing sparks at stone. As they crested a ridge of broken earth, the remnants of a small town emerged below, a warped gas station, the ghost of a water tower, and a few buildings that leaned like drunks in the wind. Crows circled overhead, dark shapes against a pale sky. The group fanned out cautiously, weapons drawn. Elena moved with practiced silence, a pistol gripped tight in her hand. She didn't need protection, though Marcus always made it seem like she did. Jude, by contrast, liked to flank her during searches, tossing casual compliments and clever lines as if charm could hold back the end of the world. "Found a diner," Jude called from across the street. "Still smells like regret and bad coffee." Marcus shot him a glare, then turned to Elena. "We should check for canned goods. Places like this sometimes had stashes in the freezer." They entered the diner together, Jude through the side door, Marcus through the front. The inside was coated in soot and silence. A rusted jukebox stood like a tombstone in the corner. Someone had spray-painted dead inside across the booth wall. Marcus moved behind the counter, prying open drawers and kicking aside moldy debris. "I used to take you to a place like this," he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena didn't answer. She stared at a cracked photograph on the wall, a waitress smiling with her arm around a man in a cook's apron. She looked happy. Elena tried to remember what happy felt like. Jude emerged from the back with a triumphant grin. "Score. Found some tins of peaches. Expired a year before the world did, but still sealed. Bet they taste like hope." Marcus took one, examined it, then set it aside. "We'll test for botulism later." "Not here." Elena picked up the tin and slipped it into her pack. Let's move. Lights fading. They stepped out into the dying sun, the air growing colder with each minute. Jude walked close beside her, brushing her hand with his fingers in what could have been an accident, or not. Marcus watched, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. They camped that night in the shell of an old elementary school, using desks to barricade the doors. A fire burned low in a rusted waste bin, casting flickering light on the cracked linoleum. Elena sat apart from the others, watching the flame like it held answers. Jude tossed a rolled-up blanket at Marcus and smirked. "Don't snore too loud tonight, Romeo." Marcus didn't respond. He just looked at Elena. She didn't meet his gaze. Outside, the wind screamed through shattered windows, but inside, it was quieter than it had any right to be. Rain fell like whispers in the dark, soft, cold, and steady. It pattered against the cracked roof of the school, seeping through old holes and dribbling into rusty buckets placed beneath. Most of the group had fallen into uneasy sleep, curled up in makeshift beds of scavenged blankets and torn jackets. But Elena was awake. She sat on the remains of a toppled teacher's desk near a shattered window, staring out into the wet silence. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked once and then was silent. She didn't know if it was real or a ghost. Lately, the line between memory and moment was blurring too easily. Marcus approached quietly, holding out a chipped tin cup filled with warm water steeped in pine needles. It wasn't tea, but it helped settle the nerves. Elena took it without looking at him. "I remember this rain," he said, voice low. "Same kind of night. It was the first time I kissed you. We were 17. You wore that blue jacket with the ripped pocket." She closed her eyes. "That jacket burned in the fire." "I know," Marcus said. He crouched beside her, close but not touching. "But I still remember how you looked in it. Like you owned the sky." The rain continued to fall. "Why are you bringing this up now?" she asked. "Because I want you to remember who we were. Who we still could be." Elena looked down into her cup. Steam coiled upward like smoke from a dying world. "Marcus, everything that mattered, it ended. You can't just pull pieces of it out of the rubble and expect them to fit again." Marcus didn't reply. His jaw twitched. Outside, lightning flickered, illuminating his face for a brief, pale moment. He looked older than she remembered. Weathered. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. Across the room, Jude stirred and sat up. Even in sleep he was restless, his mind always dancing just beneath the surface. He saw them sitting together and smirked. "Should I come back later? Or is this the part where you declare eternal love under leaky ceilings?" Elena sighed. "We're just talking." Jude stood and stretched, his silhouette tall and loose in the low firelight. "Marcus doesn't talk. He broods. Like a tragic war hero from a book nobody finished." Marcus straightened. "Go back to sleep, Jude." "Sure. I'll just dream about who Elena's gonna kiss next. Real mystery, that one." Elena rose sharply, the tin cup clattering to the ground. "Enough, both of you." The room quieted. Even the fire seemed to shrink back from the heat in her voice. "I don't want this. This pissing contest, this constant jabbing. You think this is how we survive? By dragging each other down." She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "I'm not a prize. And I'm not waiting around for one of you to outshine the other." She left them there, standing in the shadows of their own rivalry, and climbed to the second floor. The stairwell creaked beneath her, but she didn't stop until she reached the old library. Most of the books had been ruined by mold or fire, but the scent of paper and dust still lingered in the air. She curled up beneath the window, wrapping her coat tight around her. The cold pressed in from all sides, but she preferred it to the heat of their expectations. Below, Marcus sat back down by the fire. Jude paced a few steps, then flopped down with a dramatic sigh, muttering something about storms and stubborn women. But Marcus said nothing. In the silence, he remembered the riverbank. Elena laughing in sunlight, her bare feet in the water, the smell of honeysuckle and the weight of summer on their skin. It had all felt so endless then. Now everything was borrowed time. The morning arrived reluctant and gray, filtering through shattered windows like a breath held too long. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than the downpour, thick with things unsaid. Elena packed her bag with steady hands. She didn't look at either of them. They left the school in silence, boots crunching on gravel and shards of broken glass. The wind had turned sharp again, dragging clouds across the sky like bruises. The world looked like it was still bleeding from something it couldn't recover from. Marcus walked ahead, jaw tight, rifle slung across his back like a burden. Jude lagged behind today, unusually quiet, chewing on the inside of his cheek and kicking rocks with a twitch in his step. The tension between them had settled into a cold war. No open fire, just the low hum of mutual resentment. It took 2 hours before anyone spoke. "We're out of water," said Elena, checking their bottles as they walked past a dried creek bed. "We need to find something today, or we'll start dehydrating by nightfall." "There's an old reservoir marked on a map I found," Marcus said. "About 12 miles southeast. Should still have something if the filters haven't clogged." Jude snorted. "And I guess your magical map also says it's guarded by rainbow kittens and not raiders or radiation?" Marcus didn't look back. "Just offering a solution. Or leading us in a circle to play hero," Jude muttered, not quite under his breath. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus stopped walking. The group halted behind him like the chain of a rusted machine. "You're always pointing the way, always so damn confident. But how many times has your gut led us to empty shelves or death traps?" "I do what needs to be done," Marcus snapped. "You just flirt and hope bullets miss. Maybe that's why she's warming up to me, huh? Something about women not falling for robots with rifles." "That's enough." Elena's voice cracked like a whip. "This is not about me." Jude raised his eyebrows. "Could have fooled me." Elena stepped between them. Her shoulders were squared, but her eyes were tired, bone-deep tired. "You want to kill each other, do it after we find water. Until then, shut the hell up and move." Marcus turned without a word and started walking. Jude stayed behind for a beat longer, then rolled his eyes and followed. The sun crept higher, and the road narrowed into a valley choked with the carcasses of long-dead vehicles. Rusted trucks leaned into each other like drunks frozen mid-embrace. A field of twisted steel and melted tires. The silence felt dangerous here, the kind of quiet that held its breath. They found the reservoir just before dusk. It was mostly intact, a squat concrete building overgrown with ivy and dust, and a cracked metal door hanging half open. Elena slipped inside first, flashlight sweeping over the darkness. The main tank was sealed, the water within still sloshing gently beneath a thick pane of reinforced glass. "Looks clean," she whispered. "Could be filtered and drinkable." As Marcus moved toward the control panel, Jude cut in sharply. "Wait, what if it's rigged? You didn't check the entry sensors. Could be a trap." "It's an abandoned facility, not a fortress," Marcus replied. "Stop trying to trip me up." "I'm not. I'm trying to keep us alive, in case your big hero brain forgets that again." Elena spun toward them, exasperated. "Do you hear yourselves? You're both so obsessed with outmaneuvering each other that you've forgotten how to lead." Then came the sound, metal shifting. A hollow clang from somewhere deeper inside the building. Jude spun toward it. "We're not alone." From the shadows emerged a gaunt, rag-wrapped man with a shotgun, eyes hollow and bright with hunger. Behind him, more movement. 2 others, one with a machete, the other dragging a blood-stained bag. "Drop the weapons," the man said. "And maybe we let you keep your hands." Jude acted fast, too fast. He lunged for cover and kicked over a barrel, knocking it into the nearest attacker. The man with the machete went down hard, but the others fired. Shouts echoed through the building. Marcus returned fire, covering Elena as she ducked behind a pillar. By the time the smoke cleared, the 3 attackers lay in silence, and the air stank of blood and adrenaline. Marcus leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Jude wiped a cut on his forehead with his sleeve, then flashed a shaky grin. "Guess I'm still useful." Elena didn't answer. She stood at the water tank, staring at the ripples where a stray bullet had shattered the surface. The drinkable water had leaked through a jagged hole, pouring into the dirt floor. "Gone." She turned slowly, eyes cold. This is what your rivalry costs us." Neither man responded. Night fell like a curtain. The group set camp outside, near the ruins of a billboard that once promised clean energy for a brighter future. The irony was so thick it barely hurt anymore. Elena sat alone again, just outside the firelight. She didn't cry. She never did. But her eyes didn't leave the black hole of the reservoir building, where the clean water had slipped through her fingers like everything else that had once mattered. The road east twisted like a scar across the land, winding through cracked farmland and fields where crops had long since turned to dust. Trees stood like petrified bones, leafless and skeletal, creaking under the weight of a wind that never slept. The group walked in silence. Hunger was a quiet thing now, an ache they didn't speak of anymore. Water came in half-sips. The days had become a slow unraveling, each hour a thread pulled from the tapestry of who they used to be. Then came the smoke. Faint gray, rising in a thin column on the horizon. Not the wild, chaotic black plumes of a firestorm. This was steady. Controlled. Could be a settlement, Marcus said, adjusting the strap on his rifle. Or a funeral, Jude muttered, eyeing the haze with suspicion. Either way, someone's alive. Elena watched it a moment longer, then nodded. We check it out. Carefully. They approached through what had once been a vineyard. The vines had long since curled in on themselves, dead and brittle, but the wire fences remained, tangles of rusted teeth that slowed their approach. When they reached the crest of the hill, they saw them. A camp. Tents made from scavenged parachutes and tarp. Solar panels rigged to a cluster of old bus batteries. Smoke from a cooking fire. Real food on the flames. And people. A dozen of them at least, men, women, even 2 children. Most wore mismatched gear, bits of military surplus and salvaged armor. But they looked strong. Not thriving, but surviving well. Better than most. They were spotted quickly. A flare went up. Voices shouted. A man stepped forward with a raised hand, not holding a weapon, but not empty-handed either. His posture was relaxed, yet watchful. Elena, Jude said, his tone suddenly quiet. Do you see that guy? She did. He stood tall, lean and broad-shouldered, his face partly shadowed beneath a hood. He moved with calm precision, like someone who didn't waste motion or words. No grand gestures. Just presence. A quiet force. He stepped closer as they approached, lowering his hood. His eyes were gray and steady. You don't look like raiders, he said. His voice was low and smooth, like river stone. Name's Ronan. You hungry? Elena met his gaze. Starving. They were given food, real food. Carrots, some kind of grain, dried meat. Elena ate slowly, savoring every bite. Around them, the camp moved with a quiet rhythm. It wasn't chaotic. It was organized. Ronan sat across from them as dusk fell, watching the 3 of them carefully. We scavenge south of here, he explained. Trade with a few safe houses. Sometimes fend off the wrong kind of company. We've been here almost 2 months. That's impossible, Marcus said. No one lasts in one place that long. Ronan smiled faintly. That's because no one plans to. We did. Elena didn't speak much. She just listened. Watched. Ronan had a calm way of talking that reminded her of the world before. A teacher maybe. Or a man who read more than he spoke. Later, as the fire crackled low, Ronan showed them a hand-drawn map. He traced lines with his finger. Supply routes, danger zones, signal points. He was prepared. Intentional. Jude leaned in closer, trying to assert his charm. So, what's the catch, Ronan? You feed us, show us your pretty map, and in return we owe you what? An extra pair of hands? A warm bed. Ronan looked at him, amused. You don't owe me anything. But the world's dying slow, and I figure the more decent people I find, the better my odds. Elena met Ronan's eyes again. And for the first time in days, something inside her stirred. Not hunger, not dread. Something else. Quieter. Hope, maybe. Marcus noticed. So did Jude. The way she tilted her head when Ronan spoke. The softness returning to her eyes. The way she laughed, once briefly, like it had surprised her. Later that night, Marcus stood at the edge of the vineyard, watching the stars emerge one by one. Jude joined him without a word. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jude said, We just got replaced, didn't we? Marcus didn't answer. He just kept looking at the stars. Distant. Cold. Unreachable. The days that followed unfolded like leaves opening after a long drought, slow, cautious, and unexpected. Ronan's group welcomed Elena's with guarded optimism. Tasks were shared. Rotations formed. Repairs began. For the first time in weeks, they stopped running. For the first time in months, Elena slept through the night. The tension between Marcus and Jude didn't vanish. but it changed. They had no choice. Ronan assigned them both to scavenging runs, perhaps sensing the need for outlet. Marcus accepted the task with his usual quiet, focused energy. Jude played it off with jokes, but his eyes flicked toward Elena often. And every time he did, she was with Ronan. He wasn't like the others. Ronan didn't posture or compete. He didn't push or beg for her attention. He simply was. Solid. Present. When she offered to help mend a broken water pipe, he handed her the tools. When she asked about the group's layout, he showed her without pretense or pride. He listened. And Elena, weary of being pedestal or prize, found peace in that stillness. On the third day, Marcus approached her near the perimeter fence where she was working to reinforce a tarp wall. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of dust and ozone. "Can we talk?" he asked. Elena nodded, setting her tools down. Marcus glanced toward the camp, then back at her. "You're different here." She didn't smile. "I feel different." He hesitated. "Is it because of him?" She met his gaze squarely. "It's because I don't have to choose between you and Jude anymore. I don't have to perform anything." Marcus swallowed that answer like it burned going down. "Elena, I remember the world before. I remember us. That still means something, doesn't it?" She paused. "It does," she said. "But not the same thing it meant before the sky fell. The person I was then, she didn't survive the collapse. Not all the way." He stepped closer. "But I'm still here." "I know." Her voice was soft. "But so is everything that's changed." She didn't look away from him, but she didn't reach for him either. That night, they sat around the communal fire. Ronan strummed a battered guitar, the melody slow and aching. One of the children hummed along, out of tune and innocent. The flames danced shadows against the canvas walls, and Elena sat beside Ronan, close enough for their arms to touch. She didn't move away. Marcus watched from across the fire. His hands were fists in his lap. Jude leaned beside him with a bitter grin. "Well, there goes our tragic romance, huh?" Marcus didn't reply. "She chose the guy who doesn't fight." "Figures." Jude threw a twig into the fire, watching it hiss and burn. "I tried everything. I saved her life twice. Gave her half my food, told her every goddamn story I could think of. She doesn't want to be impressed," Marcus said quietly. "She wants to be seen." Jude gave a dry chuckle. "And I guess we were both too busy outdoing each other to notice." Later, after the fire had gone low, Elena walked the fence perimeter alone. The moon hung heavy and golden in the sky, casting pale light across the ruin-strewn hills. She heard footsteps behind her, but didn't tense. "Ronan." He joined her in silence, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "I've seen that look before," he said after a moment. "The one in your eyes." She raised an eyebrow. "What look is that?" "The one people wear when they realize peace is still possible, and they don't know what to do with it." Elena smiled faintly. "It feels like guilt. It always does." They stopped beneath a collapsed transmission tower, its rusted arms stretching like skeletal fingers toward the stars. Elena turned to him, the wind catching her hair. "I've spent so long trying to carry the weight of the people around me. Trying to balance it all, survive it all, keep everyone together. You don't have to anymore," he said. And in that still moment, she reached out and touched his hand. It was a simple gesture. No fireworks. No dramatic declaration. Just real. And enough. The frost came early that night. Wind swept down from the Black Hills, carrying with it the bite of oncoming winter. Thin sheets of ice clung to the edges of water barrels and window glass, and tents rustled like dry leaves straining against their ropes. Elena wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders as she climbed onto the roof of an old maintenance shed near the edge of the camp. The stars above looked sharp and endless, flickering like they were barely holding on. A small fire burned in a clay pot at her feet, its glow barely strong enough to keep her fingers warm. She wasn't alone for long. Ronan appeared quietly, as he always did, hands in pockets, footsteps measured. He climbed up beside her and sat without a word, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Elena didn't speak either, not yet. For a long time, they simply sat in the cold, the fire sputtering between them. Finally, she broke the silence. "They hate you, you know." He looked at her sideways. "I figured. They're not bad men. Just wounded. In the ways men often are." Ronan nodded once, the faintest movement. It's not me they hate. It's what I represent. Which is an ending. She turned her gaze on him then. An ending to what? He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a piece of charcoal from the edge of the fire and began to sketch lines in the dust at their feet. A ridge, a valley, a crude outline of their surroundings. Her eyes followed the strokes. You know, she said after a while, I've had so many men try to win me since the world fell apart. Not because they loved me, though I think Marcus does, but because I was something still alive in a place that was dying. Something to own. Or prove. Ronan didn't stop drawing. And what do you want? It was the first time anyone had asked her that since the world burned. She let out a slow breath, watching it turn to mist. I want to stop surviving like love is another resource to fight over. I want to feel still, even if just for a moment. He looked at her. I don't want to be saved, she added. I just want to stand next to someone who isn't trying to rescue me. Ronan put the charcoal down. Then stand here. She stared at him for a long moment. No grand promises. No sweet words. Just him, sitting beside her in the cold. Steady. That was when she kissed him. It was slow and deliberate, nothing like the frantic hunger of people clinging to life in the apocalypse. It was soft, certain, like claiming something that had already been decided in the silence. Below them, in the shadow of the trees near the fire pit, Marcus watched. He didn't mean to. He'd gone for a walk to clear his head, to escape Jude's increasingly bitter sarcasm and his own fraying thoughts. But when he looked up and saw them, Elena leaning into Ronan, their foreheads resting together like the world had stopped moving, something in him cracked. He didn't speak, didn't make a sound, just turned away, the cold biting at his skin harder than before. Jude found him back in the main tent, sitting beside a pile of salvaged batteries, staring into nothing. She kissed him, didn't she? Jude said, lighting a match and holding it over a cigarette made from dried leaves and old paper. Marcus didn't answer. Hell, I knew it would happen, Jude muttered, taking a drag. We never had a chance. Not really. Marcus looked up slowly. You think it's over? Jude exhaled smoke. You're still hoping? I don't know. Marcus's voice was rough. I keep thinking about the day I found her again. After the collapse. She was covered in ash, dragging a wounded man out of a burning truck. She looked at me like she'd forgotten my name. Jude said nothing. I thought I could earn it back. Who I was to her. Marcus looked at his hands. But maybe I was always just trying to rewrite a story that was already finished. Outside, wind howled over the tarp roofs and frost crept further across the camp. Neither man slept that night. And Elena, curled beside Ronan beneath a blanket of faded wool and silence, dreamed not of the past, but of a small house by a river that might someday exist again. Somewhere, if they made it far enough. The wind came before dawn, long, low, and howling through the dead trees like some ancient predator stirring after a long sleep. Clouds, thick and bruised, rolled in from the west, swallowing the horizon. The air turned metallic, tinged with ozone and the smell of dry earth cracking under pressure. The storm was coming. Ronan knew at the moment he stepped outside his tent. His breath fogged in the air as he scanned the sky, his face tight with calculation. This isn't just wind, he said aloud, half to himself. We've got maybe an hour before it hits. Alarms rippled through camp like shockwaves. People began rushing between tents, pulling in supplies, reinforcing shelters with sheet metal and sandbags. Orders were given, shouted, and obeyed without hesitation. Ronan's people were used to working as one. Elena helped where she could, tying ropes with frozen fingers, securing food crates beneath tarps. Ronan barely left her side, not to protect her, but because it felt right like gravity or instinct. And still, in the background, Marcus and Jude, moving with urgency but weighted by everything unspoken. Marcus lifted heavy boards to reinforce the medical tent, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. He kept his head down, but his eyes never strayed far from Elena. Jude, bitter and restless, volunteered for every dangerous task, climbing onto rusted roofs to secure solar panels, braving high winds to retrieve fuel drums. He moved like a man begging for meaning, or maybe punishment. By the time the first wave of the storm hit, the sky had gone black as coal. The wind struck like a wall, flattening tents that weren't anchored deep enough, snapping makeshift fences in half. Rain followed, not drops but sheets, horizontal and furious, stinging like broken glass. Lightning flashed. The world split open for a second, revealing silhouettes scrambling like ants over the compound. Then, darkness again. Elena and Ronan sheltered inside the school bus that served as a central command post. The walls creaked with every gust. A crash outside. Someone screamed. Jude's voice, yelling for help. Elena bolted out the door, coat snapping in the wind, boots sliding on mud and gravel. Ronan called after her, but she was already gone, racing through chaos toward the sound. She found Jude pinned beneath a collapsed wooden platform, half submerged in the rising floodwater at the edge of the camp. His leg was twisted unnaturally, face pale, blood soaking his pants. "I got cocky," he gasped, trying to grin but failing. "Thought I'd save the whole camp and win the girl in one night." "Shut up," she said, dropping beside him. "Save your strength." Marcus arrived seconds later, soaked and panting, dropping to his knees on the other side. He didn't speak, just grabbed one end of the beam and waited. "On 3, Elena said. 1, 2. They lifted. Jude screamed. They dragged him clear, the mud sucking at his body like it wanted to keep him. Together they hauled him toward the main shelter, lightning bathing them in flickering white. Every movement a struggle. Every breath fought for. Inside, Ronan cleared space in the infirmary and began treating Jude's leg, working with calm precision. Splint. Gauze. Painkiller from a dwindling stash of injectables. Jude gritted his teeth and looked away. "You're good," he muttered to Ronan. "Always so goddamn good." Ronan didn't answer. He didn't need to. When the storm finally passed, it left the camp battered but intact. A few shelters were lost. A water catchment barrel had overturned and shattered. But no one had died. Not this time. By morning, the clouds had broken apart, revealing a sky the color of steel wool. The sun crawled out like it didn't trust the world to be ready for it. Jude lay on a cot, leg in a brace, drifting in and out of medicated sleep. Marcus stood outside the infirmary tent, arms folded, face unreadable. Elena sat alone by the fire pit, watching a kettle slowly begin to steam over a rekindled flame. Ronan joined her, holding out a tin cup of tea. She took it, fingers brushing his. "Thank you." He nodded, then looked out across the camp. "You saved him." "I had to. You always do." She turned her eyes toward him. "Does that bother you?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It's why he stopped. "It's who you are." She didn't answer. Not right away. But then she reached for his hand again. Held it. Didn't let go. And across the camp, Marcus watched. Not with anger this time. Not even heartbreak. Just a hollow kind of acceptance. The kind that comes when you finally understand that love isn't something you win. It's something that either stays or walks away. The ground was still wet from the storm. Water glistened in the cracks of the road like veins of silver. Trees that had held through the night now dripped slowly, like they too were recovering from something. The sky above was washed clean, a canvas of pale blue with streaks of sunlight breaking through like forgiveness. They were leaving. Not everyone, just the strongest among them, a team of 12 moving toward the rumored settlement in the mountains. Ronan had spoken of it often, a place where old solar tech still worked, where hydro lines fed into bunkered towns, where soil had begun to bloom again. He called it the Ridge. Elena stood at the edge of camp with her pack slung over one shoulder, watching as the others prepared. Jude lay inside, still recovering. He would stay for now. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. She approached him quietly. "You're not coming," she said softly. He shook his head. "I think I'm done chasing ghosts." She hesitated. "You could still find something. Somewhere." "I already found something," Marcus said. "I just held on to it too long." They stood in silence. The wind stirred the trees above them, lifting leaves and ash into the air. "I'm not angry," he said. "Not anymore. You made the choice I wasn't strong enough to let you make." Elena blinked. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Marcus replied. "You saved me more than once. Even when I didn't want to be saved." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a goodbye laced with promises. It was just a thank you. He held her tightly, just for a moment. Then let go. Ronan called her name. She turned, and Marcus watched her walk to him. Watched as she stood beside the man who hadn't tried to possess her, or prove himself, or win anything. Just stood beside her. As an equal. The group set out at midday, boots crunching over gravel, a wagon carrying supplies creaking behind them. Elena glanced back only once. Jude sat just outside the infirmary, a cane across his lap, bruised and stubborn. He raised a hand lazily in farewell, and she smiled at him, tired but real. Marcus stood near the fire pit, already starting to dismantle it, salvaging every stone. Always the one to do the hard work. Always the one trying to build something from the wreckage. Then she turned away, and didn't look back again. They walked until the sky turned orange, and the hills rose like sleeping giants before them. The silence of the land was no longer oppressive, but expansive. Possibility, not punishment. That night, they camped beside a stream that still ran clear, bubbling through moss and old stones. Someone set a pot of beans over the fire. Someone else began to hum. The future no longer felt like a threat. Elena sat with her back against Ronan's chest, the warmth of him steady through the fabric of his coat. His arms circled her without demand. She looked up at the stars, and for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't see only loss. She saw distance. She saw direction. She saw forward. And in that moment, with embers rising like fireflies into the dark, Elena knew. Love didn't have to be chosen through conflict. Sometimes it arrived like water in a broken land. Quiet, patient, and exactly enough.